Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Louise.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi,
Hi,
everybody. This is
everybody.
my
This is my
amazing
amazing
friend,
friend,
Jenetta.
Jenetta.
Now, I
Now,
am
I am
sorry
sorry.
there's an
There's an
echo on
echo
my
on my
side,
side,
so I'm
so
just
I'm
going to
just
shut
going to
it
shut
most
it
of the
most of the
time.
time.
Okay.
Okay, I think you said you're going to do what?
I said
I
there's
said
an
there's an
echo.
echo.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay. So
I know
I
it's
know it's
very
very
irritating,
irritating,
so I'm
so
not
I'm
going to
not going
talk.
to talk.
Oh, no.
It's going to be a
So
Be a
first.
I'm
first.
going to do the cabaret, am I?
Yes.
Yes.
You'll do
You'll do
fine.
fine.
Okay, well, first of all, we'd like to invite anybody who's come through live here. Please feel free to forward your questions if you've got something that you'd like to contribute that you feel is meaningful, or if you've got a question, then just ask us and we'll address it as we go along. Um, this is really quite an interesting one because I'm used to being able to co-participate with this. So I'm having to think
No,
on
but
my
I'll
feet.
talk.
Okay, so
I'll talk.
if you'd
Yes.
like to get it going, and I'll go from there.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
first of
first
all, I
of all,
just
I
want to
just want
check.
to check.
Hi,
Hi,
Robin.
Robin.
Is the
Is the
echo
echo
bad on
bad
your
on your
side?
side?
Just to
Just to
check
check.
that. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So,
So,
let's check.
check.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Another question. Okay.
Okay.
Right. So
Right. So
I'm not going to go
I'm not
back
going
to
to go back
the
to the
comments all the
comments all the
time.
time.
Okay. So
Okay. So
Jenetta,
Jeanette,
I am
I
going
am
to
going to
ask
ask
you
you
to
to
introduce
introduce
yourself,
yourself,
Okay.
and
and
I would
I would
very much
very much
like
like
you to
to
tell
tell
people
people
where
where
your
your
journey
journey
to
to
your
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 your journey with
journey with
awareness,
awareness,
Yes. No
where it
where
problem.
it
started.
started.
Okay.
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 Go
So,
for it.
Go for it.
hi everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. This is a rather special occasion because Louise and I have been friends now for probably over 20 years, and she's walked the walk with me through my darkest hours. So she's a very precious friend to me, and what a delight to be able to share and inspire today with her. To give you an overview, I used to be a motivational speaker and I was pretty good at it. People would go away pretty fired up and going, wow, yes, we're going to tackle this and achieve that. And then I noticed that they were coming back after however long, it could be a day, a week, a month, a year, or however long, saying, usually, literally using these words, we need another dose of Jenetta, or we need another Jenetta fix. And then I realized that was their drug. And that although it was helping them, it was artificial. They were artificially taking my energy and then using it up, and then because they didn't have the skills to deal with whatever it is they were dealing with, they couldn't go forward without me. So I began to feel a bit like a guru and like the Pied Piper for the rest of my life, and I felt out of integrity. So for then I decided that I was going to start expanding my intuition, because after all, CEOs of the biggest companies in the world will tell you that their most accurate tool inside them is their gut feeling. That's where they've made the most accurate decisions in their business and home life. And so I was working on that quite intensely for a number of years. And then I noticed that people were still coming back to me and saying things like uh, they could trust my intuition more than theirs, that their intuition wasn't as accurate. And round about the time that I was questioning and feeling out of integrity again, because we're all intuitive, we all have that ability to be tuned in to what's happening. It's not a closed, exclusive club. And round about the time I was questioning again, my greatest life test happened to me. And one day, my 16-year-old daughter Jenny and I had an enormous argument. And I was applying tough love, and saying she could no longer break household rules. And so she took herself off in an absolute rage and said she was leaving home and off to pack to her room, to pack and leave home. And after a while, I noticed, I felt something wasn't right, and I went to check up on her. And I found her hanging with a broken neck in her shower. So you can imagine what that did. My whole life went to ground zero, really. Everything. It was like a series of dominoes. And the depth of grief in losing a child like that is indescribable. There were 3 times, in fact, where I actually organized to end my life because I just couldn't see how any of that could ever turn around. It was just too devastating. And then prophetically, 9 months after Jen died, I came across the basics of the process I now call the Epiphany process. I took those basics and I had to walk the walk and talk the talk. Of course, I didn't have a Jenetta to help me as well, so I had to work it through and expand it and fine-hone it and use it on myself to get to where I am today. And for 15 years now, I've worked mostly internationally online. I've worked and helped hundreds of people from day-to-day challenges, relationship challenges, work, home challenges, right through to people who were or are extremely depressed and even self-harming or with eating disorders, stuck in their rooms, feeling suicidal. I've helped many, many people through that. And I've even helped people who've been victims of terrorist attacks. So it's been quite an interesting journey. And one of the things that came out from all of this was that I was able, in fact, one of my clients, I was visiting Kenya a few weeks ago, and one of my clients in Kenya was teasing me and saying, you know, the problem with you, Jenetta, is you don't keep clients, they go away. And we both laughed because it's true. They don't stay with me very long. And the reason for that is because I give them the tools to do the work. So I help them through the initial loss because that they need, otherwise they're on their own. And then the process starts, it's their skills and tools that they start learning to be able to do it themselves. And it's been a really successful, inspiring time. I can remember getting to a point where I went, I can't live like this for the rest of my life. It's just too much. So something has to give. And this is what happened, was that these skills have allowed me and others to really deal with the extreme emotions and thoughts that overwhelm us, and to start living a life and making a difference. So that's it in a nutshell. Okay, about honoring your grief. Yeah, there are many facets to grief, but before we even can start looking at honoring grief, one of the things that confuses people is that for years now they've talked about the layers, the five levels of grief. And as much as that's helpful, because before that there wasn't any definition of how grief worked. But the problem with that is that people think if they're feeling level 3 before level 1, then there's something wrong with them. Or if they feel level 1 and then level 5 and then go back to level 1, then they're not succeeding. And it's quite a limiting way to look at your grief. Because in actual fact, the Epiphany process is a very scientific process. I call it the yin and yang of science. And basically, if you look at the yin and yang of everything, that's about cycles. Our whole world operates in cycles. This noise coming out my mouth now is coming out in decibels of cycles. And with the electricity that's lighting us and giving us this discussion today is in cycles. And our grief is exactly the same. It doesn't operate in layers. It operates in cycles. And when you understand that, if you were to liken it to the ebb and flow of the sea, when you're feeling drowned and the flow, the tide comes in and you're going, whoa, I can't cope with this. And then the tide goes out and you're coping again. And that's exactly what happens with grief. Now, there are various ways one can honor your grief, but I think one of the things that holds us back from being able to honor that grief is that we judge it. There's this big conception worldwide that grief should be eliminated at all cost. That we've had the loss, and by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the loss of loved one. Grief comes in many different forms, from jobs to self-worth, to situations and lifestyle. I mean, I believe the whole of the world is in grief at the moment with all the COVID stuff happening. So it all operates in that way, in that when you judge it, it makes it something that you should try and get rid of, and yet it's your most vital tool on the journey, on the path to bringing yourself back to operating a new style of life after that loss. And that's really important, is to understand the value of grieving rather than judging it. That doesn't mean that when you do that it's an easy thing to do. But that's basically, in a nutshell, how many people get stuck because they think that they shouldn't be grieving at all. And then the other thing is that a lot of people, let me just read this before it goes away. You taught me that principle while you were totally devastated after Jenny died. How did you honor your grief? Okay, I'll come to that now. In fact, I've forgotten what I was saying before, so let me go to that now. How did I honor my grief? Yeah, because I knew back then that it was really important. I call it allowing and wallowing. And it's a most powerful way to move forward. It's really important, and this happens with anything. It doesn't have to just be grief. On Monday night, when UK, I'm in UK in Oxford, when they announced total lockdown again, I went into a hissy fit. I was there going, no! And I had to allow those feelings of frustration and overwhelm and even panic. I had to allow them. And it's the same with grieving. It's about allowing the overwhelm and allowing the panic. And I always say there's a certain point where, in allowing it, it means that your thoughts and feelings are being honored and respected and heard and felt, so that there's less judgment. The judgment goes. And then when you click over into wallowing, that's when you're in self-pity, going, oh, poor me, and garnering people going, oh, don't worry, we're here for you. That doesn't mean that when you're allowing, there aren't people doing that. But that was one of the big things, was to allow myself to feel the overwhelm, the vulnerability, and to know when I had clicked over into self-indulgence.
I'm going to try and say something.
Okay.
Okay, so what I learned from you at that stage is that you took the time that you needed.
Sorry, the time? I took time. Yes. I didn't give it took time out when I needed it. Yes.
And make it beautiful.
Yes. No, absolutely. I didn't try and pretend that I'm okay. When I wasn't okay, I told people I wasn't okay. And that's a very good thing, because also what happens is people have this invisible rule book. In fact, even before the rule book, let's take a step back. Because people don't know what to say to you when you've had a big loss, like similar to mine, I call them band-aid cliches, because they don't know how to handle it. They try and fix the situation in the moment that they're talking to you. So you get them saying things like, well, they're in a happier place now. And I remember going, really? Have you been there? Can you guarantee that? Do you really know what it is that they are? Or God needed another angel, or at least they're out of pain now, and well, you have other children, and there are so many band-aid cliches that come out because people don't know what to say or how to handle it. So that's the first thing that I had to handle, was saying to people, I'm going to say to you, rather than trying to fix me and tell me that it's okay when it's not, or trying to tell me how I should be, what would be so special is to have you to just sit and listen and try and understand. Saying words like, I have no idea what you must be feeling, but I'm sitting here listening to get an idea of what it must be like. And then immediately I felt supported and loved, and so on. And then the next thing that starts happening is, even after a month, people were saying, well, what are you going to do about moving on? Or after 3 months, they'd go, well, it's 3 months now, and it's really important that you live life again. And it's like, as you said, where is that rule book that says, we hereby decree that at month 3 you will be feeling all right again? It comes in those waves. And as much as I have processed this loss to a point where the most inspiring things have happened because of this loss, the most inspiring things have happened. At the same time, the loss is still the loss. And it'll be there with me for the rest of my life. And it's especially hard at some times than others. Anniversaries. Jenny died 2 weeks after her 16th birthday. So September and October are hard, difficult times for me. When her friends have got married and had children, when my other children had their weddings and Jenny wasn't there. My children's children, she's never known them. There's a whole load of missing, and that's there for forever. And there are times where it does get me, and I go, but because I've got these skills and techniques, I'm able to work them, and I have been able to move forward from an inspired place as I see and understand and embrace the bigger picture of what's happened.
Jenetta, how's your sound?
Yes, much better. What happened?
Okay. Headphones.
Okay.
Because I don't like this. I want to talk.
Love it.
Okay. So you have this enormous loss. And you know to not push it away. You know that it needs to be processed. Now I want to step back a little bit to the part of you skipped. Did cancer teach you something?
Yeah, I didn't mention that 9 years previous to losing Jen, I survived cancer. And yes, cancer taught me a lot. I can remember everybody saying, you've changed, you're different. And I'd go, really? You think? Because I nearly died twice. Yeah, it did. It gave me a whole different perspective. So yes, it taught me that nothing is forever, and it taught me a new set of values and to honor what I felt more than what other people thought or felt, so that I could be more in integrity and true to myself. So it taught me that 9 years before Jen died. Didn't mean I got it right, but it taught me that that was the path I wanted to take.
What would you say is the thing that you needed to leave behind when you had cancer?
One of the big things was being able to understand what that cancer was about. And I talk about this a lot in the certification program I have, because there's a reason why disease is called disease. Because if you break it up, it's dis-ease, which means you're not at ease with yourself. And that means that your emotions are out of kilter. And we actually have very, very clever mechanics in our bodies. Our bodies are our most wise, they're wiser than doctors. So when we try and beat a disease and fight a disease and see it as something that needs to be avoided, then we're not understanding what the message is that that disease is giving us. Because usually wherever you're feeling or whatever you're feeling anxious about, you bury in a certain part of your body. And if you allow your body to become your messenger, it starts giving you signs as to where that excess energy has been buried. Because we're in a society that doesn't easily, it's getting better, but doesn't easily allow us to express where our fears and judgments lie. So that they sit buried in our bodies, and our bodies start saying, okay, this is where it is. So and it's so interesting to see, if you've got throat problems, often it's because the emotion you perceive you're running is that it's not safe to speak, or you're incapable of speaking. And so each part of the body, when it starts showing symptoms, is giving you a really precious message. So if you try and shut it down without getting the message, it really complicates things. So that's the first thing that cancer taught me, was to understand what had created that cancer and what my body was trying to tell me.
Okay, now if we talk about suppressing grief.
About?
Suppressing
grief. Yes.
Okay. So and understanding the effects on the body. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. You can go with this one now.
Actually, following on with what we've just said, for a long time, just after Jenny died, Neil, her brother, and I flew up to Kenya, which is where I'm from, and flew out to Kenya with Jen's ashes. And I remember saying back then, my heart, I can feel the shape of my heart in my chest in pain. I could draw it. That's how painful my heart was feeling. It actually, I could define exactly where my heart is. So that's what happens when you suppress grief, because you're back into judgment. It's going to sit somewhere. And I kind of got, it's really important I do something about my heart, because literally my heart was breaking. I could feel it. My heart was breaking. So suppressing grief, when we're in the perception that everybody expects us to be all right, and we try and conform to their expectations, it's going to have an effect on your body. So it's far more sensible to find skills and techniques and tools to let that grief out in the most powerful ways, so that it becomes your guide. Your grief becomes your guide.
Okay, talk a little bit more about that. Letting it out.
Well, I mean, we touched on it earlier. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that when you have a loss like that, let's stay with the loss of a loved one, because as I said earlier, grief comes in many forms. But let's stay with the loss of a loved one. One of the things that I work with people time and time again is that often secretly as they realize the person has died, there's a part of them that's grief-stricken. Or they're in a coping mechanism which keeps them cool, calm, and collected, but they're filled with either shock or something's going on there. But the other thing is the counterbalance that comes in, which is that there's a sense of relief. It's like, oh, thank goodness they're gone. And it doesn't matter who it is that they've lost or why or what the reason is, it's there. Now what happens is and often that's happened, and then after the shock of everything, they've buried that happened. And somewhere in there, inside them, is the guilt and shame that they should ever be relieved that their loved one has gone. And my first instance of realizing this, I was at a presentation filled with mostly mothers, but some fathers who'd lost children from any age to early adults and adults. And I said this to them, and I said, one of the things that really can hold us back is when we realize that a part of us was actually relieved that our loved one had gone. And I nearly got lynched. These parents, I think if they could have strangled me, they would have, because they kept on saying, how can you say that? I mean, I would do anything to have my child here, and anything for that to not happen. I would never, ever be relieved that my child is gone. And, it was like deafening, and I just stood there and just let them all carry on. And then almost at the back of a room was a mother, and she stood up and she said, I understand what you're saying. She said, my child was crushed by a horse. She was at a riding lesson, and the horse fell on her, and she was instantly killed. And by the time I got to her, they were already getting her ready to take away. And I was filled with absolute remorse and loss. And she said, and as I was standing there going, can't we do something to bring her back to life? Are you sure she's dead? There's always that question. Please make sure. Are they really, really dead? Can we really not do something? At the same time, she was going, no longer have to pay private school fees. And she was brave enough to stand up there and go, yeah, that was one of the things, because what happens is there's a myriad of conflicting emotions going on. And that's one of the biggest, and it can create really deeply complicated grief if it's not addressed and seen to and so on. So that's one of the things that we work with. But the biggest thing of dealing with grief, that list of all the loss is something we run daily when we've lost a child or a loved one. And it's easy to run, and you don't need any help from anybody to list that list. So when a person comes to me, we start running the counter list. Told you it was a yin and yang situation. And through some very scientific questions that then, I have people sitting there going, I've never been asked a question like that before. They start being able, on a conscious and an unconscious level, listing where in all areas of their lives, in spite of the fact that there's a list of absolute certain loss, where at the same time, equally, that loss is serving in all areas of life. So you can imagine initially there's a lot of like, whoa, no, can't do this, how can it possibly serve? In fact, There are two types of people that can or can't do this. There's ones who are comfortable being uncomfortable. They're the ones that they're sitting there getting something out of the emotional mental pain they're going through. It could be a huge support group, or a sense of purpose, a sense of identity. It makes them matter. So they'd rather hold on to the pain of all their loss than move on. But the person, which is where I got to, I crossed a street. It's a very prophetic moment that happened to me, where I made a decision that I couldn't go on another minute living like this for the rest of my life. It was like living an emotional prison sentence. I crossed that road and I went, I cannot take another fucking minute of this. I can't do it anymore. And I call that being uncomfortable, being uncomfortable. And then you're prepared to make that list and start listing in all areas of your life that as much as the loss is there, this is where it's serving. This is where there is equal gain. As I say, I didn't have a Jenetta to help me through, so it took me longer than it takes me with people now, because I've got it very fine-honed.
Jenetta, can we talk about being stuck in your grief?
Yeah. Well, it's very much what I was saying just now, which is if you're comfortable being uncomfortable, you get stuck in your grief. So there'll be either one or many things that define you in your grief, and you either feel that it serves you or you feel guilty about letting go of your grief. So, and that's especially so with parents. Think about it. I mean, some people say, are you for real? Are you really for real? Because what parent can say that they're living their life purpose because their child killed themselves on them? It's so you can imagine parents going, if I say I've moved through my grief, that means that I'm not a very nice person, a very nice parent, and it means I didn't properly love my child. So it's the guilt and shame that sticks us in our grief. But I always say, if you had been the one who died and everybody left behind was stuck and filled with angst and couldn't hardly eat or breathe or sleep or live, would you want your loved ones left feeling like that because you died? And most people go, no, of course not. So, well, that's what you're doing to the person that's moved on. You know, you're stuck and it's not helping anything. So it's being able to identify where your judgment, your guilt, and your shame and your fear is sitting. Yeah, being stuck in the victimhood and finding the value of being where you are rather than trying to show that you are model citizen number one by grieving. A lot of people go there because they think they'll be judged if they say, actually, I'm powerfully moving through it, because you don't get over it, you get through it. You never get over the grief, you never get over the loss, you get through it. And when you've got powerful skills and techniques to get through it, then you step into into an inspiring place, and it helps so many other people. Apart from you.
Coming.
The next question. Ta-da!
Where does it now?
Resistance to what? Resistance.
To what is.
Yeah, it's a resistance to what is.
Not wanting to accept.
Yeah, it's actually... You see, we go into perception, which feels like the reality, but it actually is perception. And there's a positive perception and there's a negative perception. And whilst we're feeling positive, the positive perception feels like the truth. And then when we're in negative, the negative perception feels like the truth. And both of them feel so definite whilst we're in that space. But when you can understand that actually what we're dealing with is a mixture of positive and negative, that there's value in the negative as much as there is disservice, and that there's disservice in the positive as much as there's value. And when you get that coming together, where you can manage the extreme thoughts and emotions, then you get actually what's happening. You get to see it in its true light. That's why I call it the Epiphany process, because you see it in its true light, in its true form. It's not a distorted over positive or a distorted over negative, a fantasy or a nightmare. It's what actually is. And when you're in that place of actuality, you become very clear and certain, and you step into a place of acceptance. And it's an opening heart situation where you go, I get it. And your whole body change. I watch people lighten up. They come out of this deep, dark, heavy energy. You know how when you see a grieving person, the heavy energy around them, they're heavy to be around. And I watch them lighting up and going, I get it. And it's amazing. Somebody sent a message then, I didn't see it.
Oh, goodness, many.
There are many. Okay, so let's open up to them.
I think so. Yes. And if people have questions, go first.
Yes, I'm just not getting them here on my side.
No, because I distracted.
I've got them now.
Okay, good.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much for what you're saying about illness. Indeed, what it is telling you, that's the most amazing messenger. Yes, those type of comments were so hurtful. Yes, the band-aid cliches of, well, it's time to get over it, or they're in a better place, and all those things. It's like Norma, so nice to have you here. Thank you. You assisted me greatly when my brother hung himself, and your compassion, time, and teaching helped me deal with my feelings and grief. Oh, sweetheart, just such an honor. Such an honor. Linda, such wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing this. I'm grateful to know how to hold space instead of trying to fix. Excellent. Yeah. Listen to your body from Miranda. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you so much for what you're saying about illness. Esther, very courageous what you mentioned about possible relief after a loved one has passed. That's very important to lift that taboo. I so agree. Esther, it's a biggie. And then Miranda's now come through with, I was relieved Mum was gone as she wasn't suffering anymore. Yeah, that's an acceptable relief, agreed. But knowing she was gone was different. The shock of death still hit in the days and weeks, even when you're prepared. I so get you, Miranda. And then the finality of it meant that there was no chance of being together or fixing old problems. Exactly, that's a big one. Or her having any input into my life in the future. I was unprepared to this and the empty feelings. And the other thing, Miranda, what you've put is so I'm sure everybody's going, yeah, get this. And the other thing is that, those band-aid cliches, oh, well, she was suffering, she's in a better place, or she was 150,000 years old, so, it was her time. It's like, no, your mother is always your mother. Your father is always your father. It doesn't matter how old they were or how old you are. You could be 90 in the shade. They're still your parents, and that loss is profound. So thank you for that, Miranda. Antoinette, what a brave and liberating point of view. Very refreshing. Thank you. I define from Linda Newton Bowles. I definitely felt very guilty feeling the relief of my mum's passing. Thank you for throwing your light on this. I was grateful my son was killed instantly and not hurt, but no relief that he's gone ever. Yeah,
That's not what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not, you say it. What am I saying?
You're not saying a relief that they're gone forever. You say a relief after they passed. It's not something about forever.
Yeah, it's about, it'll be something like, oh, at least now they're no longer my responsibility. That's where I went. This was Jenny's fourth attempt that she succeeded. We'd been walking a walk for 3 or 4 years with her. So it was like, oh, thank goodness, I no longer have to be responsible for her harming herself. She could harm herself and really badly injure herself. It's things like that. So it'll be about something that no longer needs to happen, that was burdening you about that situation and that person.
Jenetta?
Yes.
Do you remember what you said to me when you phoned me to tell me that Jenny has passed?
I was in such
shock.
You're going to have to remind me.
So I don't normally tell people, but because you hear I will. You said you didn't have to watch for when it, because you knew it would happen again. You and everyone in your family was watching all the time.
Yes.
That was your relief.
Yes. I know one of the things I was able to work through was understanding that if we still had Jenny around us, it would be very precious and special. So this is not saying having her around, it wouldn't be. It would be. I'd love to know what kind of adult she would have become. And when Jenny wasn't in neurosis, her wisdom, I'd go, wow, Jenny, where did you get that insight from? I miss those conversations that would have been potentially around. But when she was in neurosis, it was really, really deep. And I know for a fact that the chances are, no, I don't know, but the chances are that we as a family would have spent the rest of our time on tiptoes looking out for Jenny. And when she'd have her down, everything would have to have been dropped to help her. And maybe she'd got married and had children. And so it's enabled us as a family to step forward and start new conversations. More honest, more vulnerable, more open, because of that loss and because of that happening, with the result that some very meaningful things are said and done in our family that would be missing if Jenny was still around and we were running around trying to save her. So she's given us the gift and art of conversation. It's things like that that's been able to happen. And so, yes, and that relief, I knew. She kept saying to me, I'm not going to stay around. Nothing's helping me and I don't want to be here. So she did say that often. Yes, Alex, so difficult not to ask, how are you after a death? Not the right question, but deeply meant. Yes, of course. And how are you is the reason why it's difficult is because you haven't got other ways to say it. So when you sit down with a person or you phone a person and say, I can't even imagine what you're feeling, but it must be a myriad of emotions and how you're feeling must be changing from second to second. So I'm here to just listen. If you don't want to listen, if you just want me to sit and we keep quiet and silent, I'm here. Or if you want to come round or phone me and let it all out and have a non-judgmental ear that won't try and fix you, I'm here. That's the conversation that really goes down very well. It's like, oh, yes, thank you. So Alex, thank you for that. Robin, oh, I get that. Thank you for clarifying. She suicided. Okay, yes, she did. Yeah, she hanged herself. I found her.
Okay. So let's talk about grief that's not obvious.
Yes.
I had a grieving inside me for years because of a relationship that went away. Some people, a lot of people, especially after deceit and loss of trust, they lose the outlook on life, their safety.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I want to talk about, because we don't even know we have it.
Yes.
And so we don't know that we're supposed to grieve it.
Yes. Those are coping mechanisms that kick in where we've lost trust, there's been deceit, we've lost trust. So we go into a coping mechanism where we put up an armor to make sure that that never happens again.
Mm-hmm.
And so what will happen is we'll make sure that how we respond to people and circumstances is guarded. So we go into other relationships, and it doesn't necessarily mean romantic either. It can be friendships or wherever, with very guarded conversation, actions, reactions, judgments, and fears. So we're not ourselves. We become inauthentic, but it's the only coping mechanism we have.
But also we don't know that we are supposed to grieve that loss.
Yes.
So we don't.
No, that's the coping mechanism, because we don't even realize there is grief there. We just think, right, I need to protect myself and put that armor up, and then I'll be okay. Then I'll be safe. So yes, absolutely. There's a grieving process in any form of loss. And when you know what to ask yourself and how to work it through, what takes weeks, months, years, and a lifetime normally can move like that in a nanosecond. When you've got the correct tools to ask yourself, and you just suddenly go, got it. And then suddenly the defenses come down, and you understand the value of your vulnerability, the value of being able to speak. People talk, when I work with them, they say they start having authentic conversations with others, not from a place of judgment and not from a place of fear, but just their truth. And it's so liberating.
Can we talk about complicated grief? Where it's not just my granny died in a bed, there was a lot of trauma involved.
Yes. The trauma is a big one, because trauma has ways of surfacing in its own way, depending on our coping mechanisms. So we're not only dealing with that loss, but by way of example, last year during COVID, a very special friend of mine whose son had gone to school with Jenny in Kenya, he suddenly didn't wake up one morning. They found him dead in his bed at 30 years old. And she and her husband was stuck in Kenya in lockdown. He died here in the UK. And it was just all very traumatic for them, and I suddenly could feel my grief that I had felt in losing Jenny, because it was very close. She's a very dear friend of mine. And I was going through, I watched the ceremony online because of distancing and lockdown. I couldn't get to the funeral here in UK. Reaching out to her, and I could feel that my grief was coming. Here was another wave of grief that I hadn't realized was still in me. And I mean, Jenny died, well, it'll be 16 years this year. So she's been as dead as long as she was alive. And I could feel it, I could see it going, here's another wave of grief. And thank goodness I had the questions. But the most interesting thing happened. I was getting into bed one night, and just as I closed my eyes, the whole scene of finding Jenny the way I did flashed through my mind. That's the PTSD, and I'd never had PTSD in 15 years. But it wasn't just the whole scene, it was one moment, that split second where I found her. In that first split second that I had inadvertently buried, and it was that horror of losing a child and seeing them dead. And I didn't even know I'd even felt that horror in that split second. And it was like either the room had come into where I was lying down, the room where she died, or I'd gone back there. It felt like I was there. And I just allowed the tears to flow. And I've got a very supportive partner, and Andy sat there and he held me, and I cried it through, and then I even went online and talked about it. And the complicated grief, one of my biggest advocates of this process is Victoria Pina. And Victoria lost her sister, baby sister and mother in an attack, a rebel attack in an African country. Their car was attacked, and they climbed into a drain, and the fighting and attack went on for hours, and there was mortar and gunfire, and Victoria got hit. She was only 12. She got hit with shrapnel, and then when it all came to an end, she had her baby sister sitting behind her and her mother behind her baby sister, and she turned around, they were dead. And she thought she'd handled it, and 18 years later, on her birthday, she went through a whole day of PTSD, going, yeah, and living it again and again and again. And she hasn't looked back. She's actually qualified in this process and helps people through eating disorders and this. So that complicated grief is wise to deal with. And the moment you start doing the backwards and forward questions of the gains and losses, it's addressed very, very powerfully. And,
but it's not something you would do by yourself.
No, it's practically impossible to do by yourself. The big thing is, because that's the other thing people say to me, don't you find it really tiring and overwhelming and draining working with people through trauma? And my answer is no. If I had tried other ways and methods, yes, I would be a piece of chewed string. But this process, within one session, I watch people lightening up, even in the most horrific of circumstances, already going, wow. And then fourth there.
So somebody's in deep post-traumatic stress disorder, and they are supposed to grieve. Then I'm going to say you need to deal with your post-traumatic stress symptoms before you can grieve effectively. Because PTSD is a dissociative disorder.
Yes and no. That's looking at it that's PTSD and that's grief, and they're not separate. They're one and the same thing. The PTSD is just an extended symptom of your grief. You can't separate it. So the moment you can start working through them together, it is amazing, absolutely amazing. I had somebody who was very traumatized as a child by her parents. And so the grief and loss of a childhood and loss of being parented lovingly and the PTSD, because it was really severe abuse, we worked through together with these questions because they're hand in hand. They're not separate.
Yeah. I had very bad post-traumatic stress disorder. And I do know that I worked through both at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's you have to be aware of it. And most of us are so thrown that you don't actually know.
Yeah, It's so true, because it is freaking overwhelming. It feels like you've lost control, and that something outside of you or inside that's from outside is controlling you. It's scary. It's very, very frightening. So that's why it's very valuable to learn the skills to deal with it. And it's practice. Because it's a skill. It's like javelin throwing. Okay, I'm going to be a javelin thrower, and I go to the field and I pick up a javelin and somebody shows me how to throw it, and then I say I'm a javelin thrower. No, I'm not. I've still got to practice it. So dealing with your grief and PTSD is learning those skills, and it's I call it daily mental and emotional gym. And to this day, people also presume, because I now have this successful work and I work internationally and I'm doing more and more here in UK and things are amazing, and that I've got all my ducks in a row. And who is it? Robin was saying, the value of your vulnerability. Wow, that's beautiful. That's exactly where I am. Is I will sit, and when I'm in a place, I'm in an place, and it happens, and it still happens, and it's going to happen till the day I die. This doesn't make me superwoman. This makes me somebody that's found skills that are very accurate, very capable, and I have to use them. If I sit back and go, oh well, I've done all the work and I'm amazingly over it, guess where I am? I'm out of balance again. It's time to do the work more than ever. So that vulnerability is your strength. Yes, Robin, your vulnerability is your strength. It just
we're not supposed to ignore.
Yeah.
We're supposed to honor, which is your turn.
Yeah.
And honor it whenever, even if it's 10 years later.
Yes. And here Miranda's saying PTSD is in itself a form of grief. It is. It's just shocked grief. It's grief and shock.
Okay, so we're going to ask for some last questions. And I'm going to ask you, Jenetta, if you have to say one thing that will help people through grief. Faster, easier. No, not even, I don't want to use the word faster. Just easier. Well, it's not supposed to be easy.
No. It can be easier. It's understanding, if there's one thing, it's understanding it's not about getting rid of your grief and judging it. Grief is a vital tool on the journey of getting through your grief. It's a very vital tool, getting through your loss, rather. So it's a vital tool on the journey of getting through your loss. And when you look at it and thank it and allow it, rather, like I was saying, disease shows you where things are. Your grief is showing you. It's your guide. It's a really painful guide. And we try, in fact, here's the big thing. Anything worth creating comes from pain, stress, and tension. Artists will tell you that their greatest pieces of work, whether it's writing, poetry, art, pottery, stained glass, whatever it is, their greatest pieces have come from their most greatest pain. So a mother can't birth a baby without pain, and yet it brings, that's the essence and the seat of all creativity. And we've grown up in a society that thinks pain should be avoided at all costs. What should happen with pain is to learn how to naturally manage it. And
that was exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Because we have a society that denormalized death.
Yeah, exactly.
And taken it out of our homes.
Yes.
And now we don't know what to do.
Yes.
We've taken away the rituals.
We've taken away the rituals, and we've given it a bad name.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas birth, life, and death is part of the cycle. And when we go, it's birth and life, and avoid death until you can't avoid it any longer, there's a lot of judgment, stress, and fear attached to death and dying. This is another topic, of course, but it's where a lot of the world is sitting right now, trying to avoid death to an extreme. And avoiding it is sensible, but when it's in extreme, some extreme reactions and actions happen attached to that extreme fear and judgment.
Got a few more comments.
Yes. Don't deny before then. I did not have any idea. This is Robin. I didn't have any idea I had PTSD. For 8 years after my son was killed, I was trying to stay alive and I didn't know what it was. Yeah, it's huge, 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 huge. And Miranda, don't deny your grief, embrace it. Move with the waves. And we're a society who denies death. Absolutely, Robin. Yeah. And that when you understand how precious death is, it's part of the pain. You can't have, let's go here. Science tells us that energy can't be created or destroyed. When it works in cycles, energy works in cycles. So when that form of energy completes itself in that form, it just doesn't disappear. It reforms into a new version of itself. So if there's birth, there'll be death omnipresent at the same time. So if you're seeing birth all around you, look for where the death is as well, because the two go hand in hand. They're one and part of the same cycle. And when there's death, there's birth. So when you can start seeing where in this form of death, where is there's birth of new ideas, problem-solving skills, new approaches, new friendships, new levels of faith and trust. There's birthing there in the death of loss of faith and trust, and the loss of relationships, and the loss. There's birth. And when the two are seen as one, there's no separation. Or very little.
Yes. So we're getting to the end. So I'll to follow on this. And I hope people can hear me now. So my experience with loss and grief and post-traumatic stress and going through stuff that I don't want anybody else to go through, just listening with deep gratitude. And my way through now is to go straight to the gratitude before I know what I'm grateful for. Because if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't be able to write a book, help anybody, be healthy today, be who I am today. So it was hard, but it was worth it.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a door.
That's the birthing of a new version of yourself in.
Yeah, there's a door. You just know it's there.
Yeah.
Once you know the door is there, then it's easy to go through.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask everybody. I've invited a lot of people who are going through grief right now, but I also know that there are other people out there. And so if you know somebody who needs help, please share. And there's a reason I asked Jenetta, because if you are stuck, please talk to Jenetta. Okay, thank you for coming, Jenetta.
Louise, thank you for this forum. These are healing, inspiring ways to move forward through places that feel so stuck. So thank you for creating it today. Very honourable.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the comment tomorrow afterwards. Jenetta will also go back. So keep on, please, even if you watch afterwards, please keep on commenting. We will go back. And if you need to tag somebody, then you do that. And please share. Okay, my friend.
Thank you for all your participation, everybody who has participated today. It's very valuable, all that you've said and asked, and it's an honour to meet you all too as well.
Thank you, everybody. Lots of love to everybody. See you soon again. Okay. Wait, I forget. Wait, Jenetta, you can read that last one.
Thank you, both of you.
Okay. So what I need to do is I need to find my song. I always forget my song. Okay, so I need to find my song, and then we're going to play my song. And then I'll see you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Jenetta. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.